Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Mindful Millions podcast. Thank you so much, Jesse, for being our guest today. And today's episode theme is decoding financial planning models. But before we dive in, I'm going to give a little introduction. Who is Jesse and what is his background, his credentials, and relevant experience? So he did some research and development for Bears Playground and then became a thermal and systems engineer for L3 Harris Technology, was there for over 6 years before becoming the author of the Best Interest blog, which I would highly recommend subscribing to. And he's been doing that for almost 7 years. And now he is a relationship manager for Cobblestone Capital Advisors in New York City, or not New York City, New York State, in the Rochester area. And he also volunteers with Lollipop Farm, which is a humane society of Greater Rochester, New York. So, as I mentioned, today we're really going to explore the differences between working with a fee-only advisor, a fee-based advisor, a hybrid advisor, or comparing how that compares to doing it all yourself. But before we dive in, I wanted to just ask Jesse to share a little bit about what inspired that change from engineering to financial planning.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on today, Christina. I'm really happy to be here, and I like the conversation, the ideas that you've put together. So I'm excited for that too, and I think the audience will get something valuable out of it. Yeah, like you alluded to, so I have 2 degrees in mechanical engineering and started my career in the engineering world. Worked in aerospace at L3 Harris for a while. And while I was there, kind of in my mid 20s, found myself lost in my own personal finances, didn't know what I should be doing with my money. And that started me down this journey of learning a lot, reading a lot, kind of being that person in the online forums and listening to all the podcasts I could. And then I eventually, while I was still an engineer, started my blog and then started my podcast. And got to the point where readers and listeners were reaching out to me looking for me, for me to provide them with interesting and complicated answers at times. And that's when I looked in the mirror and said, I'm kind of having more fun producing content and interacting with my audience than I am being an engineer. And I knew there was always this career out there of being a financial planner. So that's when I took the dive. It was basically 4 years ago and left the engineering world completely and came over. And now I'm working for a fee-only wealth management firm here in Rochester, and I'm sure we'll get into what that means today.
Yep.
But
Mhm.
it's really been fun, and all systems go on the world of financial planning. And I still have a affinity, I still have a affection maybe for engineering, but I've left that world behind.
Yeah. When actually, I'm going to give a little backstory about how we met.
Yeah, please.
So a client had first interacted with Jesse and was looking for more point in time fee only financial planning, which Jesse's firm didn't offer. And he referred that client to the platform that I am currently an advisor for, which is hellonectarine.com. And we ended up having a great meeting, just a 1 hour session. And he had a great experience, told Jesse about it. Jesse reached out and we connected via Zoom, loved what you're doing as well. And that is how you are here today.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And because there really is, something I found from all the interaction with listeners and readers and with my clients is like there's a place in this world for hourly planning, for fee planning, for ongoing recurring billing models. Um, Maybe in my opinion, there's less of a place for some of the other billing models or fee models that we can talk about today. But that's just a matter of opinion and a matter of taste. But
Yep.
right, there are different advisors out there to kind of meet the needs of different clients depending on maybe how comfortable they are doing it themselves, DIYing it versus how
Mhm.
much they really want to outsource ongoing. And so anyway, it really is different it's like, different flavors for different tastes.
Exactly. Yeah. To each their own is one of my favorite mottos. And so I think right now, what I wanted to discuss is, and maybe it is all of the different terms that tends to confuse people. And so we're really going to focus on those four that I first mentioned: fee only, which we both technically work for those
Hmm.
fee only firms; fee based, and then hybrid, which would be a combination of these first two, and the last being doing it yourself. I am in the office, so let me go ahead and blur my background. But continuing, so maybe go ahead and break down what is fee only.
Sure, sure. You can let me know if I've differed, if I've gone off the track from your understanding. But uh, this is one of the fundamental questions that anybody out there ought to ask any advisor that they're considering to work with. Is how do you get paid, right? How do I, as the
Mhm,
client, get charged? How do you get paid as an advisor? And the fee only model, it truly means that the only way the advisor is collecting revenue is through the fee that the client pays to them. It's a clear fee discussed upfront before paperwork is charged. And really what it means is, there's no sort of, say, commission going on in the background that the client isn't aware of. There's no sort of referral fee going on in the background. There's no trading fees going on in the background that the advisor is collecting that the client isn't aware of. And the reason why that's so important is because, as we'll get into, there are some billing models out there where the client might not be aware that the advisor is benefiting from a commission or from a trading fee or from something like that. And that could present a conflict of interest because if the
mhm.
advisor says, "Oh, Mrs. Client, you ought to do XYZ," if the advisor is getting paid extra for that recommendation, we can no longer be confident that that's in the client's best interest because it has a benefit for the
Right.
advisor as well. So the fee only model, at its core, what it's meant to do is get rid of that conflict of interest because
Mhm.
the payment between the client and the advisor is so clear.
I think you worded it beautifully. Could not have said it better myself. Um, and so now I'll describe what a fee-based firm is,
Yeah.
and it is where there's a lot of additional fees going on behind the scenes. And I started my career at Vanguard and then Fidelity. So both of those were fee-based firms. And that meant we were doing a combination of advisory, financial planning fees, plus selling insurance products and receiving some of those commissions. And even it was confusing for myself as an advisor, sometimes trying to explain, the fee structure to clients. And yeah, so I definitely felt like it wasn't very transparent, and it just made it a little bit harder to decipher when the recommendations were really, like you said, in the client's best interest. Because when you look at the commission payouts and just the dollar value of those insurance products or the recommendations, they're usually in the hundreds of thousands. So that's why it just seems obvious that advisors are going to be incentivized, because at the end of the day, they're trying to make a living as well. And so then that's where I felt like sometimes they don't really educate the clients on, hey, you actually have a really good emergency savings. You have a long time before you retire. So you can take the risk and you don't have to do a protected strategy. And so that was one of the things that I definitely saw, and or just the conflicts of interest. And that's
Mhm.
what led me to go still actually to a hybrid model. And that was where I was at before I decided to work for Hello Nectarine, which is 100% fee only. But then after a few months with Nectarine, I ended up starting my own fee only firm. But the difference being I could actually manage clients' investments, whereas with Nectarine, we do not offer that service.
Right.
Um, yeah, and maybe you can speak a little bit about the hybrid model.
Yeah, and I mean specifically because you had said you came from a hybrid firm, so that was I assume a broker dealer hybrid with some sort of fee only practice. Is that right?
Exactly. One, I guess we didn't offer fee only planning. Definitely no fee only planning at Vanguard or Fidelity. It
Hmm.
was assets on one, I guess. No, so then I lied. There was a fee only option with assets under management,
Yeah.
but they were always going to still try to not pressure you, but they still sold. So they were a hybrid where actually they could their hat and try to sell insurance products. So then
Interesting.
that would then switch you from the fee only
Yeah.
to more of the hybrid, which it
Right.
was again even confusing for me, because then even trying to get compensated under that model becomes very murky. So
Right.
I got out of it as soon as I could.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Good
that it
training
just
and respectable firms, and I love their low
Sure.
cost products that are diversified, but there's definitely, or when you're in those firms, you can only really present those options to clients, and
Right.
that's why I wanted to be independent and be able to really educate clients on everything that's out there.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that is, I mean, there is unfortunately a good amount of that in this industry where, understandably so, Fidelity probably only wants to deal with Fidelity products and Vanguard only with Vanguard products and Schwab only with Schwab. Um, Yeah, the hybrid model though, going back to that question, Christina, I mean, first off, the whole idea is like hybrid between what and what, and we just introduced a new
Yeah.
term there, broker dealer, that we haven't really talked about before. And the way I would explain that is if you rewind back, call it 30, 40 years ago, this industry was really dominated by broker dealers. These were firms, stockbroker. That's where the term stockbroker comes from. And the way that financial advice was given to clients, well, first off, it the idea of financial planning was pretty minimal.
Hmm.
Instead, it was mostly investment advice. Because again, this is really before the era of passive indexing being as popular as it is today. So back in the day, it really was. You probably had a contact at a place like a Merrill Lynch or a Morgan Stanley, and this
Hmm.
contact was your broker. They would call you a couple times a month with the latest hot stock tips. And they
Yeah.
would recommend to you, like, hey, we're going to sell out of these four companies from your portfolio, and we're going to buy into those five companies. How does that sound? And you'd say, all right, you're the one at the Wall Street firm. You know better than me. Go off and do it. They would do it, and they would earn commissions from those sales, right? They would earn
Hmm.
brokerage fees. It was the more they trade, the more they churn, the more money they're going to collect, the more commissions they're going to collect. So that's the old tried and true broker dealer model. As time's gone on, the broker dealer industry is growing smaller and smaller. The independent
Hmm.
fiduciary industry that we're a part of is growing larger and larger. Uh,
Hmm.
my understanding is that a lot of these brokerage firms are starting to kind of see the light in some way. At least they're seeing
Hmm.
the revenue in some way and realizing that maybe they need to offer more quote unquote fee only options where they don't charge brokerage fees or commissions, I should say, but instead they just charge a transparent fee that you or I might be used to. But the challenge they still face is that most of those advisors there, like you alluded to, they wear both hats. They wear the
Hmm.
broker dealer hat and they wear the fee only advisor hat. And depending on which client they're talking to, and cynically, I might argue, depending on which hat earns them more money in that particular
Right.
conversation,
Yeah.
that might be the hat they choose to wear right there. So that's why even it can be difficult at times for a client to say, oh, are you a broker? Are you a fee only advisor? How do you charge? And that's where it can be difficult at times to get the clear answer that you're looking for.
Yeah, and I think the key question that clients need to ask is, are you a fiduciary? Right.
Hmm.
And if your advisor works under an RIA model, which RIA stands for Registered Investment Advisor or advisory firm, then they do have that fiduciary obligation. They work for a broker dealer, but they have, for example, the CFP, which stands for Certified Financial Planning designation, then they also have that fiduciary responsibility, even though the firm level or at the firm level, they might not have it. But they would have, as broker dealers, the suitability standard, and I guess now the best interest standard. So I think the industry did start to recognize that problem, and that's why they created that regulation called best interest. And now even broker dealers or anyone that's not a fiduciary, they are trying to make them have a little bit more of that or the client's best interest in mind when they're presenting any recommendations. So that's one step forward in the industry. But like you pointed out, I think in general, I also see the wave towards fee only financial planning because it just seems more ethical.
Hmm. Hmm. I think that's a big
Um,
part of it. That's a big part of it. It's more transparent, easier for people to
yeah,
understand, and leads to better results for our clients.
Yeah, so I actually wanted to segue into the pros and cons of each model. And starting with fee only, the very first pro that I was going to mention is transparency. So definitely, and as I think we've been alluding to, less conflicts of interest and the fiduciary obligation. So that's definitely usually, and I think any advisor that wants to be fee only, they want to have those deeper relationships with clients. And I think by having less conflicts of interest, being more transparent, and always putting the client's best interest first, which is having that fiduciary obligation, then it's going to be a better client experience. So yeah, I think that's why I'm
Mhm.
a big fan. So now the cons, maybe you can point out some of the cons of the fee only model.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose I'm a little biased because I think of myself like, what are the cons at the end of the day? Well, I mean, I think one of them is that because the fees are right there in your face, I think it could be
Yeah.
understandable for a client to think that it is more expensive. Like,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, $250 an hour, or
Yeah.
$4,000, $5,000 for a financial plan, or
Yeah.
0.75% of my portfolio. It's, you could run the math, and the apocryphal story I like to tell involves my dad and an advisor who was not a fee only advisor, was one of these commission-based advisors in some way, shape, or form. This is again 30 years ago. And my dad asked this individual the question, so like, Adrian, how do you get paid? And Adrian said, "Oh, don't worry, Chris, because these numbers I'm showing you here on this paper about your potential returns, all of these numbers, my fee has already been calculated." And well, if you're listening closely, Adrian didn't actually answer the question, right? But what he did was he presented it in a way to say that you as the client, you get this thing I'm showing you, and me as the advisor, I get paid some other way. You don't have to worry about how I'm getting paid. And that is anyway,
Red flag.
it is because what's really going on under the hood is that they're probably getting paid a huge chunk of whatever the client is putting in. They just
Hmm.
don't have to be transparent about it. But the whole idea is, yeah, like, yeah, I suppose it is a bit of a con in some way that um, it can be a little startling to see, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to pay you X dollars. And
I
it
had
might,
an in. Oh, go ahead.
no, it might end up turning some people away.
Yeah, I had a target ideal client intro yesterday, and
Hmm.
she has never worked with a financial planner, but is making over 250,000, has a rental property, and has hundreds of thousands in cash because, and she said it herself, I have a scarcity mindset. I know I
Hmm.
need to do something with it. And, but again, she's never worked with a financial planner. And I quoted her 6,000 for the year, just simply based off of my planning services are based off of the client's income and their investable portfolio, and whether their situation is complex or simple. So anytime we have more than one income stream, so in her case, rental income and earned
Hmm.
income, she happened to be a small business owner. So that also is just another nuance. But so I quoted her 6,000 for the year because of the complexity. And she definitely had some sticker shock and straight up just asked me, can you help me understand the value? And, would I make this back in my investments? Or, how do you really justify that fee? And at the end of the day, I think I also realized we're saving clients hundreds or thousands at least, they could make it back in just those tax savings or investment returns down the road, especially if they need someone to really help them assess how much should be kept in the bank, how much can you invest today, and what exactly even if you want to do it yourself. So I definitely saw also clients that didn't meet minimums for AUM services or even fee only services. They weren't able to access the planning. And so I think
Mm.
that really, well, ultimately going back to the pricing, I ended up agreeing, or the price that she felt comfortable with was more around 3,200. But I think again, that's because she just has never worked with an advisor and really was having a hard time understanding the value of a financial plan. But so I think overall we're going to make progress, or we're going to end up working together. So I was able to really explain the value, and she does see, or now actually she had to talk it over with her partner. So that's another planning discussion.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so going now into the pros of fee-based advising, which technically the pro is being able to buy the insurance product. Because something that I think clients don't understand is fee only planners, even though we're not selling you insurance products, we could still do insurance planning. So maybe you can highlight the difference between insurance planning and just insurance sales.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's where I think, and again, every financial planner is free to run their practice in their own way. And as you and I know, Christina, I mean, some planners really want to dive deep into long-term tax planning. Other planners might have some sort of specialty in like a estate planning area and gifting
Mhm,
money next generations, that kind of thing. Um, the whole idea is like there are a lot of questions about money. And a lot of financial planners try to help their clients in all different arenas uh, whether it pays them more or not. And because of what we just talked about with the whole fee only process, the answer is it doesn't pay them more. It's just that the fee is very transparent. Uh,
mhm,
and so a really good example would be if a client came to you or I and said, listen, I now have a kid. I'm worried that if I die, I should probably have some life insurance, right? Well, yeah, you and I are free to help them assess how much life insurance they ought to buy, right? How much coverage they need. Um,
mhm.
whether it should be a term policy or not. Hint is it almost assuredly should be a term policy, that kind of thing. So that way, when they
Mhm.
go off, we can then send them off into the marketplace. They can go buy a insurance policy through the internet. They can contact maybe a local insurance broker, but we can help them feel confident that, hey, you ought to have $2.5 million in coverage, and here are the reasons why. So that right there
Mhm.
would be, I would call that insurance planning. Uh,
Mhm.
again, if you start with, say, an advisor who sells insurance, who I would just call an insurance salesperson, there is the chance that they might say, well, am I going to think of the policy that actually is the best fit for you? Or am I going to feel conflicted because there might be other policies that pay me more of a commission as the salesperson? And that is something that I think as consumers and clients, we want to avoid.
Yeah, and actually, I worked for a fee-based firm before starting or working for the fee-only firm and starting my own. And I
Hmm.
did just think of a benefit or something that I did see more as a client service because I do see the benefits of sometimes having an annuity. It really depends on the client's personal risk tolerance, and maybe
Sure.
they don't have the stomach to be invested in stocks and ride the volatility. But so what I saw at that firm, and I again think that this is more of a benefit, is they would help clients who maybe were at a point where they were starting to get more comfortable with the stock market. They would be able to move, maybe 10% penalty free from the annuity every year into their investments. And so the advisor would essentially help them complete all of the forms and paperwork that's required to do that. And again, they're really able to provide that whole service within their one firm, which technically, they're partnering with insurance companies for the product. So it's really your advisor is working with your investment management custodian and the insurance company to then facilitate that experience. But overall, I think the reason I left was I felt like the products were leading the planning and the
Right.
analysis wasn't leading the planning recommendations. So yeah, I'm very, let's let the numbers speak for themselves and then have a discussion with the clients about their goals, their risk tolerance, and their values. And then let's decide or collaborate and come up with the best plan to move forward.
Yeah,
And go ahead.
I'd be curious, Christina, in your old firm, you know, in the world of fiduciary planning, or even sometimes in the world of content creation, when you see someone online who's trying to provide good advice to their audience, you might hear of this SPIA, SPIA, single premium immediate annuity, as kind of like,
Another word for that is a MIGA, a multi-year guaranteed annuity. Same thing,
is it?
different
Yeah.
lingo. Yeah.
Okay, okay. And like, again, I'm not an annuity expert, but that's been presented to me before. Like if you go on Schwab and you look at their SPIAs, their single premium immediate annuity, it's kind of like the purest form of an annuity and oftentimes the one with the lowest fee. Again, is the one that I've been presented. That's how it's been presented to me. But for that reason, then I've also been told that they tend to be the annuities that are sold the least because they have the lowest fees and they have the lowest commissions. And instead,
Interesting.
these complicated annuities with often higher fee structures are the ones that actually get pushed onto clients. I don't know because I've never worked in the industry and never sold an annuity, but I'm curious if that's when you were there, if you saw like were the annuities that were sold, were they, in your opinion, like good annuities, or what did they look like?
Yeah, so actually the firm that I worked at, I did feel good about, we mainly used fixed indexed annuities that
Okay.
provided guaranteed lifetime income withdrawal benefits.
Okay.
And those withdrawal benefits sometimes, and so with one of those policies, you have the account value. So let's say you put in a single premium of 500,000. Sometimes those policies offer just on the guaranteed lifetime withdrawal base, which is separate from your account value. That's what they might give you a 10 to maybe I've seen 30% bonus of whatever the initial premium is. But then this is where sometimes clients would get confused and they think, oh, I'm getting that 30% bonus on my account value. But no, you're only getting it on the guaranteed lifetime withdrawal base or income base value, which if let's say you were also, and that's an additional rider that's where it starts to get more expensive. And those riders typically start, the first year they'll give it to you at 0.9%, but then after the first year it goes up 1%, then maybe 1.1. So those are the things to really look out for. But then again, so let's say for the first 10 years you're paying for this additional rider, and for whatever reason you didn't understand the policy, you cancel the policy, and that premium or that bonus that you got on the premium was essentially funny money, is how I like to call it, because it just
Mm,
goes away unless you turn on the income rider, which is separate than annuitizing the account value. So this is where I think it gets complex. And if you have, an insurance advisor that's going to, because I think what I also saw a lot happening is these insurance agents sell the products and then they quit, or they just offload that client somehow. And
right.
then
Right.
the client gets left all on their own, and not understanding the fees, not understanding the rider or how to really use that vehicle. So I think I realized that there is a way to really use annuities appropriately for protection and
Hmm.
diversification of the portfolio, especially for conservative investors, because that firm was primarily servicing pre-retirees, retirees. So, I definitely don't encourage anyone that's in their 20s or 30s to be considering annuities, but even teachers, for example, sometimes they automatically get put into 403bs that are annuity products. And
Right.
so at the end of the day, it's also what your circumstances are and what you have access to. But
Yeah.
that's where,
Yeah.
you have to take that into consideration when you're on the job hunt.
Right, right, totally. That's interesting to hear your experience, because even then I'm trying to follow the if then logic of riders and annuitizing and this and that the other thing. But I know I'm sure some people listening are DIYing it. And I'm just curious, when you think of these fee models and hiring an advisor as compared to the DIY route, um I don't know, where does your mind go to on that front?
So I think we're in such an interesting time that we're actually back in the days, and I guess up until now, it's really been do it for me, which is you have to meet a minimum and then they're going to charge you a percentage usually, or do it yourself. And then you're kind of lacking that comprehensive financial planning support normally. And so now with fee only, with no AUM, which is what Hello Nectarine offers. And do you guys offer no AUM fee only plans?
We used to.
Okay,
I mean, I can dive into that a little bit, but
go
the
for it.
short answer is we don't anymore. Our only fee model at this point is AUM based. Yeah.
Okay. And so we're both fee only. One is with AUM, one
Hmm.
is without. And so, yeah, the nice thing about what Nectarine is really able to offer clients who mainly are do-it-yourselfers. So the majority of clients that come through Nectarine, they've done it themselves all their lives, and now they're at the point where things are getting more complex. They just want a second pair of eyes, or they're maybe considering an AUM model because they're busy professionals and want some time back. And or they have been with the firm for many, many years and now want to start doing it themselves. And so that's where it really becomes a discussion about what does it take to do it yourself. So I think it really, or actually maybe you can highlight the pros of doing it yourself and why someone might
Yeah.
consider that.
Yeah. I mean, for a long time, I considered myself a do-it-yourselfer, and to some extent I still am, right, in my own life. And I would wager that the majority of my audience considers themselves do-it-yourselfers, right? And they come to me to just add little arrows to their quiver and add bits of knowledge to their repertoire to make themselves more effective do-it-yourselfers. So I've got a lot of respect for the do-it-yourselfer community. Um,
Agreed.
right. It's that kind of lifelong pursuit of education and getting yourself smarter in a particular area and then applying it to your life. It's the analogy I use is, some of us cook every single meal from scratch at home. Some of us don't like to cook though. Some of us change our own brake pads and change our old oil and tinker around with
Mhm.
our engines in the garage. And some of us have never gotten grease on our skin because, like we don't know what we're doing at all. And right, exactly. And so you just kind of go through all these common parts of life. And I think the realization is that we have each specialized into certain areas and then decided to outsource other areas. And
Mhm.
I see personal finance and financial planning and retirement planning and investment as just another one of those where some of us love to dig into the details and we love doing it ourselves and we love having that control.
Yep.
Maybe we love the fact that it keeps our costs low. Maybe we
Yeah,
just love the
exactly.
fact that we're, pursuing our own education, and that's amazing. Um, but I do think and just in my experience, I've encountered a lot of people where for them, they don't want to commit the time to learning all this
Yes.
stuff. They simply aren't interested. Whether it's just the idea of money doesn't interest them, the idea of taxes, of investing, maybe the inherent math, even though I think maybe you and I would agree we're not talking, Calc 3 here. This isn't
Adding and
overly complex
subtracting.
math. Yeah, exactly.
Maybe
Some
some multiplying
percentages.
and
Yeah,
dividing.
some exactly. Some percentages, some multiplying, dividing. It's nothing unwieldy, but still, some people aren't comfortable with math. But for whatever reason, at the end of the day, um, for some people, they want to do it themselves. They enjoy that, and other people just
Mhm.
want to outsource it. So that's the way I see it. But how do you see the DIY landscape?
Yeah, I really encourage it. I think it's more empowering. So actually, once I left that fee-based firm, I became a financial coach for that reason
Hmm.
exactly. But that because of the saying, instead of giving a man a fish, you can teach him how to fish. But then I also started to realize time is our most valuable asset in working with, people trying to get them to change their behaviors and their
Mm.
mindset for a very low price was just not a sustainable business model. And so I also, yeah, just realized that by being able to be more specific with clients and give them recommendations, and instead of, again, trying to get them to change their mindset and behaviors, really just being an accountability partner and making sure that they're making progress towards those recommendations. It just speeds up the transformation process, is what I believe now.
Yeah, yeah.
But
No,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think you've hit the nail on the head, and there are many different reasons. I think to myself that there are many different reasons that I've heard from people of why they decided to pursue the DIY path more. And on
Hmm.
the same side, there are different reasons why either some people never pursue it in the first place, or what's always just really interesting to me is I feel like I've interacted now with people who kind of run this gamut of having some pretty good DIY competency, and then
Hmm.
they either come to me and they say, Jesse, I need someone to spot check my
Yeah.
financial plan. It might take a few hours, or it might be like this one-time planning thing. And that's when I send them your way, right? I introduce
Yeah.
them to people like you, to Nectarine and other hourly or flat fee planners like that. But then
Hmm.
also, sometimes it'll be, listen, I really like DIYing this stuff. My spouse doesn't. If I were to
Hmm.
die, my spouse would be clueless. It's taking up too much of my time. It's keeping me up at night. I just want to
Yeah.
offload the entire thing. And I know I could DIY it myself, but I just want to
That's an
offload
estate
the
planning
entire thing.
strategy.
So to some extent, right. And so it really does run the gamut of how interested someone was in the first place in DIYing it,
Hmm.
and then over the long run, do they stay DIY forever? Do they eventually start consulting on an hourly or flat fee basis? Do they eventually hire some sort of full-time AUM or recurring advisor? and it's all shapes and sizes.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest cons that we really haven't or talked about is real mistakes, or if you do it
Mm,
yourself, you're more susceptible to maybe making emotional decisions.
yeah.
And that really also highlights the risk of lack of being objective and missing nuances like taxes and estate planning and again insurance planning. I really even like to highlight cash flow planning. I think
Hmm.
cash flow planning is underrated in our industry. Because
Totally.
I think cash flow is what we can control, whereas investment performance, we can figure out what the long term target allocation, is going to be
Hmm.
and make sure we're rebalancing quarterly. And, at Vanguard, I think what I really took away is in order to manage an investment portfolio, or like you said, to manage anything, it takes time, willingness, and ability. And
Yeah.
ability is more of like that education. So I think to summarize, people who should consider doing themselves is someone that enjoys it and has time. But maybe if you're a self-employed individual with, or just maybe a family or a parent, someone that's very busy, who maybe has complex situations, that's probably the time where you can use some support. And I think it's important that clients just be very honest with themselves about, are you going to take the time to actually maintain it? Because that's what I like to stress to the clients that have been working with an advisor. And I think they don't really understand maybe even what that advisor was doing for them for that fee. And so now that they're going to take it over, just understanding what you're signing up for, I think. So now let's talk about maybe how do we help clients choose what's right for them? So what questions do you think they should ask?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's when people ask me that question, the unselfish answer is that there's this great article from the Wall Street Journal from maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago at this point. It's the 19 questions you ought to ask a financial advisor by Jason Zweig, who's kind of one of the preeminent financial writers
Mhm.
right now. So that's just a terrific answer that, or a terrific article that I have as a PDF that I'll send to everybody. I took his list and added a few more on and published it on my blog of just little things like succession planning and just some smaller
Love
questions
it.
that I think people should be asking. But I mean, the really basic questions would just be, am I looking for comprehensive advice or am I looking for someone to kind of push some sort of product on me? That's
Mhm.
a pretty easy one, and if it sounds like a loaded question, well, it probably is. Uh, because I think it should be a pretty easy question for most people to answer. And then another big one that harkens back to what we just talked about on the DIY part of things is, am I interested in implementing this advice largely myself?
Mhm.
Or am I interested in outsourcing that implementation onto my professional? In other words, do I want this to be maybe a series of meetings over a few weeks or a couple months, and then I sail off into the sunset on my own with the knowledge that I just learned? Or am I looking for something ongoing for potentially years, potentially the rest of my life? So those are some of those easy questions up front. Maybe a harder question, but still something worth considering is how complex is my family situation? I think it's a harder
Mhm.
question because not everybody has that spectrum in their mind to understand whether they're simple or complex. Like
Yeah,
complex
like
compared to
they
what?
might, yeah, exactly. Like they might, in my eyes, have a complex situation, but because they've lived it all of their life, they're like, this is a simple life.
Exactly, exactly. Right. So to that end, you could think about things like, do you own a business? Do you get some sort of
Exactly.
variable equity compensation? Do
Hmm.
you have a blended family? There's a really cool one that I'm
Yes.
working with someone right now. It's like a 65-ish year old couple. It's their
Uh-huh.
second marriage. They're both bringing their own substantial assets into the marriage. They both have children from their first marriages. And there's this interesting estate planning conversation going on because it's like, well, do you consider the assets joint or not? Like this is the questions I'm
Hmm.
asking them.
Titling is so important.
Title, exactly. If one of them passes away, do you want your assets to go to your new spouse or not, or do they go to your kids? And then when your spouse passes away, because just picture this, Christina, the wife passes away first, the assets all go to the husband. I mean, you know this, I'm preaching to the choir, but I know the
Oh
listeners
yeah.
might not. So now the husband has all the assets. Well, when he dies, do they all go to his kids? What about her kids? Aren't they entitled to
Hmm.
some of it? So anyway, the point is, these are things that people don't often think about, or to them, it's complexities that they aren't even aware of. Like you don't know what you don't know, but still,
And it's a little
it.
bit morbid I think some people
Oh,
just don't want
sure.
to plan for their death.
Sure, totally. And that's always a touchy subject and kind of, we have to try to be sensitive to bringing it up. But at the end of the day, it is still
Yeah.
very, very important to bring up, almost like money itself, right? Money itself is a sensitive topic. It's
Yeah.
like, politics, religion, sex, money, death. These are all sensitive topics. But in the case of
Yeah.
money and death, these are things that it's our job to talk about them candidly and transparently. Um, but yeah, I'm
Agreed.
curious. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? What
I love
takeaways would
estate
you,
planning.
yeah, go
I
for
think
it.
there is so much value in, and I think because I have a personal experience seeing how my grandpa
Hmm.
immigrated from Mexico, was an entrepreneur himself, went from
Mm.
selling onions to owning tire shops and a bar and apartments and dying a millionaire, but then
Huh.
leaving that millions in a trust that my mother was the trustee for. And so she was responsible for going to other of her siblings and trying to get the loans repaid back into the trust. And I think there wasn't a lot of financial literacy in our family overall. And I think some of our family members just thought that those loans would like kind of go away once my grandparents weren't there, but they didn't realize that, trust is a separate living thing that despite the
Yeah.
creators going away, yeah, the trustee still needs to follow the trust agreement, get all of the money back, and then distribute it to the beneficiaries, which is funny because
Hmm.
the loan people that were paying the loans were also the beneficiaries. So, but overall, I just saw how a lack of estate planning and education and more family discussions, I think, that never happened, while my grandparents were still living is what really caused all of those conflicts. Luckily, they've all been, resolved and that trust has been distributed and everything, ultimately ended well. But that's one of the reasons why I think just helping clients review their titling, and it does get more complicated when it's blended families
Hmm.
or interstate, foreign nationals marrying, United citizens. It can get complex. And I think it's sometimes when we even ask those questions, you can tell that they've never talked about it. Or even, when you're having a goals discussion and you're asking them, so do you have plans to start a family? And they've never talked about it.
Right.
Have you ran
Right.
into those types of
Right.
situations?
Oh, I mean, totally, totally. And it's, yeah, it's just your story about the trust. I mean, to some extent, it's not, I don't want this to come across as glib, this whole idea of like you get what you pay for, but
Oh yeah.
the, most often, like if you were to give me 1,000 situations where someone dies and it causes mass confusion because estate planning was never talked about or discussed or planned in the first place, or 1,000 scenarios where, right, a couple reaches a certain point in their life, they've never really discussed this stuff, and they realize they're way behind on retirement planning, or just they've missed the boat on some important topic. Um, I mean, more often than not, there's this idea where they whether they knew it or not, they went down this path where they had no sort of expertise in their life. They were flying blind. And yeah, they ended up paying for it in some way. And it's not
Mhm.
that we wish that upon anybody, but there is a reason why our industry exists. There is a reason
Oh
why, for
yeah.
example, like the CFP designation is growing like hotcakes. And there's a reason why not the investment advice industry per se, but the financial advice industry, the
Mhm.
financial planning industry. There's a reason why it's growing and it's so thriving as it is. And it's because a lot of consumers out there have realized that, oh, there are a bunch of professionals who will help me answer those questions and therefore help me avoid those long-term consequences. So,
Mhm.
more often than not, I'm not saying that people like you and me are superheroes who can prevent every negative outcome ever. But like I said, you give me 1,000 people, and I know that we are going to make a lot of otherwise negative outcomes go away. And we're going to bring about a lot of positive outcomes that they might not have even been aware of.
Yeah, and I think it really starts again with just education. And so that's why some of the tips you can look for when you're trying to find an advisor is that CFP designation, but I do also like to highlight, just because someone doesn't have the CFP, that doesn't make them a bad advisor. But I think just going back to asking questions and asking how they're paid, if there's anything you take away, that is one of the main points. And just really, and I guess not everyone needs comprehensive planning. So again,
Hmm.
really first figuring out what do you need and how much time are you willing to invest in your portfolio and managing it, I mean. And if you're willing to take the time and you enjoy it, maybe you can work with a fee only advisor more as like a someone to just help overlook all of your plans and, like you said, just give you more tools in the toolbox. But what would you say they should really look out for? What are some tips?
Yeah, specifically on the hunt for advisor, you're saying some tips on
Hmm.
that. Yeah. You're right.
Or
I mean,
things to look out for. What about some red
yeah,
flags?
red flags. Sure, sure. So, I mean, again, I would think of things like someone who's just not willing to answer very direct questions about fees, about services, about expected outcomes. I would think about someone who wants to lead with a product instead of
Yep,
leading with a plan or kind of advice. I think that's a pretty big one. I mean, even the sales process itself. It's like I really enjoy what I would call the sales process here. I'm an engineer by training. I don't really think I have many sales chops, but I just enjoy talking to families about what's going on in their life, what kind of problems they're
exactly.
facing, what kind of advice. Like I start to kind of give away advice for free during those
Right.
initial meetings. And I tell prospective clients like this is a two-way street. I'm trying to figure out if you're a good fit for me and my practice, and I'm hoping that you can figure out if I'm the right kind of advisor that you're looking for. And if at the end of this meeting we realize that it's just not a good fit, then I'm going to say so. Um,
Right.
as opposed to, I think there are some other maybe like hard sell, arm twisting, it's like really super fear-based sales tactics out there that people can and maybe should be wary of. What do you have any red flag horror stories?
I mean, no, you just feel it
Yeah,
when someone's
yeah.
trying to sell you something. And I think I have the horror stories, from being on the end. Not, it's not a horror story, but I definitely felt like in our industry, so my time at Vanguard, Fidelity, and the small firm, not at Nectarine, I don't feel this at Nectarine,
Hmm.
but it definitely felt like that business model wanted clients to not contact us, like they wanted to spend the least amount of time with clients, typically have like the highest return. And that just didn't sit well with me. I want clients to be engaged. And I think the more that you interact with clients, the deeper that relationship is going to go and the more that you can really provide a better service. And so, yeah, I think that was a red flag when advisors want clients that they think they're not gonna have to service, like that they're gonna be able to collect revenue and they only have to talk to them once a year, if that. I
Hmm.
I thought that was, well, now at the end of the day, again, if your situation is simple, then maybe a once a year check-in after the plan is built is okay. But definitely it's just going to depend on each individual's
Right.
situation.
Right, right. No, but I agree. I mean, I've thankfully I'm kind of turning the corner and I've done this enough to just to know that engaged clients are more rewarding to work with anyway, more interesting to work with anyway. Um,
Exactly.
but yeah, anyway, my opinion, just my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I wanted to highlight some of the tools where people can find fee only advisors. Are you actually on a NAPFA or XYPN or the fee
Good
only network?
Good question. I actually think that I'm not sure as a firm if we are, but I do think that some of my colleagues are on there, especially we kind of divide up some of the responsibilities here. So I think we have now 8 CFPs on staff, 6 or 7 CFAs. Um, and so I think some of them are on some of these networks, but I don't think I am unless someone else put me on there. But that's okay. That's okay. I've heard good things.
Maybe you can share a little bit about where people can find you and your blog
Sure.
and your podcast.
Sure. Yeah. So if you're interested in reading my work, or what's probably now popular these days is listening to my podcast, my blog is the address is bestinterest.blog. The podcast is called Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors. It's on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And kind of like the steady pulse if people want to stay in touch is I send out a weekly newsletter. The sign up is right on my homepage at bestinterest.blog, and I send out all my new blog posts, all my new podcast episodes, so that way you never miss a new send new content.
Perfect. And I definitely always like to provide links at the bottom of these episodes. So I'll definitely do that. And also want to encourage all of these listeners to subscribe and follow the Mindful Millions podcast, leave a review. And again, check the show notes for all of those resources. If you can send me that article with the 19 questions,
Totally,
I will
totally.
totally link that also.
Awesome. Okay, will do.
But it has been such a pleasure talking about financial planning models with you. And I think in summary, we can summarize it as not all advisors are the same, and understanding how they are getting paid and what services they're really going to provide you is the most important thing to focus on. What are some final thoughts that you might have for listeners?
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail right on the head. This is for better or for worse, this is an industry. I think in law, you have to get a law degree and pass the bar, and in medicine, you have to get a medical degree and pass your boards. And unfortunately, I think in financial services, the rigor isn't quite there. So a lot more is on you, the consumer, the
Mhm.
customer, the client. But thankfully, there are a lot of resources out there to help you start to filter through the good, the bad, and the ugly, and hopefully end up with someone who really is a good fit for what you need.
Exactly. Ditto to all of that. But thank you so much, Jesse, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks, Christina. Bye bye.